Basically, we're about trying to figure out a way to better integrate the natural and built landscapes in the region. I got started as a grad student at PSU 49 years ago. I was at PSU and somebody came and did a presentation. The city at the time wanted to fill Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge, which some of you, how many of you have been there? Yeah, they wanted to fill it, to put a motocross course and a bunch of other things. So that was my first involvement in urban green spaces. In '82, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife came to Audubon Society, where I work for 36 years, and said, we don't care about urban wildlife, we have nothing to do with it. If we give you $5,000 from our non-game program as a grant, will you take it on for the region? I had just finished a stint at Oregon Episcopal School for 2 years, and I didn't have a job, and I said, sure, I'll do that. Started working on inventory work around the region. The very first planner I spoke with, Gary Cook, Clackamas County, said, there's no place for wildlife in the city, go away. So what I'd like to do is show what we've done over the last 30 plus years, 35, 36 years, to change that attitude. Not, there's still some planners out there that tend to think the urban growth boundary is sacrosanct and we can't protect green spaces inside the UGB because that'll take developable lands away. And that's a totally absurd notion. As you all know, we need to have both good, high-density, well-thought, well-designed development along with the green spaces. So that's what I want to focus on, and then Tom will talk about a specific project he's worked on very near here. When I started the Institute, and Tom's a board member of the Institute, I chose this as our motto: in livable cities is preservation of the wild. It's a corollary to, does it sound familiar?
Not yet.
Henry David
Thoreau. Thoreau sounds familiar.
In wildness is the preservation of the world. And so my argument is, if we don't have cities that people positively love and want to live in, we're not going to protect those wild areas outside. So we have to have both. And the only way you can have a livable city is to have access to nature, parks, et cetera, et cetera. And you all know we have an urban growth boundary, and the idea is to have regional, sub-regional, and town centers, to have high-density development with transit. Unfortunately, last and least has been the ribbons and green, going back so many years. There's no place for nature in the city, and that's what we're trying to combat. And in fact, we've done a good job of controlling urban sprawl. Here we are out in the northwest. This is can't remember the road right now, but there's the ag land, there's the city. We've got an urban growth boundary. Between 1990 and 2000, the region grew by 37%, but only 4% of land consumption. So it's been very successful. Question is, what about inside the urban growth boundary with regard to quality of life and biodiversity? This is a Cedar Mills Creek watershed in 1984. You're all into watersheds. Mm-hmm. This is what it looked like in 2002. If you're a cutthroat trout, try to imagine making that stream. The problem is, the philosophy of our planning program has been, here's the city, there's nature. You get in your car, you drive Mount Hood, you drive up the gorge, you drive to the coast. No, we need access to nature where we live and work and play. Urban biodiversity is not an oxymoron, which I was told very clearly by groups like the Nature Conservancy and others. Forget nature in the city. It's all trash. We need to protect the pristine environment out there. Well, it's not an oxymoron. Part of the contribution of that philosophy was the work Nature Conservancy and others did, and I have a huge regard for TNC, but they had a very different mission back then. Ironically, I'll be on a panel next Tuesday speaking to the International Urban Program of the Nature Conservancy. They have come around to see the importance of preserving nature within the urban environment. What they did back in the early 80s is map Oregon, Idaho, and Washington for biodiversity. Well, when you map at that scale, inside our urban growth boundary, it looks like, and they call it this, urban, meaning it's paved over, there's nothing there. Thankfully, I had a good friend at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service who contracted with the same people to map at a much finer scale. Blue, and this should be blue here, as here and here, is low species richness or low biodiversity. Yellow is very high. Once they map inside the urban growth boundary at appropriate scale, look at all the yellow that pops up. So you have areas like Ross Island, Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge, huge amount of biodiversity right in the heart of the city. And even the built environment, the St. John's Bridge, 6% of all of the peregrine falcons in the state of Oregon nest on the bridges in Portland. The most productive peregrine falcon nest in the state of Oregon is on the Fremont Bridge. Here we have thousands of boxes swifts. How many people have been to Chapman Elementary to watch that spectacle amid? So even something like a chimney, which they see as an old growth tree to them, which there are very few of now, they utilize that chimney to roost in before they head south to South America.
Didn't they try to pull it down and there was a big...
There was a big issue. I don't want to go into it.
Yeah,
It takes too long. Audubon got together and actually paid to protect that and put in a new chimney for the kids. So, well, actually a couple teachers got pissed off about being cool, and they complained about it, and it became a big issue. I took this photo of this young naturalist at Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge a few years ago. It's not just about protecting nature or biodiversity. It's about making sure that this kid and his family have access to nature, right? A good friend of mine, Bob Pyle, wrote The Thunder Tree, and in it he had a chapter called The Extinction of Experience, and he posited this, I think, very provocative question. Why should that kid care about the extinction of the California condor if he hasn't even seen wren in his own backyard? So this is about access to nature as well. A good friend of mine, Richard Louv, wrote a book called The Last Child in the Woods, which he posited a syndrome, nature deficit syndrome. If kids don't have access to nature, they don't learn well, they're not as healthy. And to demonstrate how important his work is, this is a quote from a fourth grader in San Diego when he gave a presentation. I like to play indoors better because that's where all the electrical outlets are. So a huge part of what we're trying to do is get people to put their damn electrical, their digital devices down and go out and actually experience nature. What I really would like to focus on are the lessons we learned, not necessarily the outcome, which is important, but what did we do to try to change the attitude of there's no place for nature in the city? Well, one is create your own reality. I got involved as a grad student at Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge, as I said. Good friend and I, for example, I got a bunch of signs from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. We took a hammer, nails, and a ladder and a fifth of Jim Beam and posted 40 signs, 40 of those signs around Oaks Bottom, saying it's a wildlife refuge. Within a few weeks, the Oregonian actually wrote an article referring to the Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge. So it's a little guerrilla activity that sometimes we need to engage in. And in fact, in 1988, we wrote a management plan for Oaks Bottom that City Council adopted, and it has since then been managed as an urban wildlife refuge. Building on legacies. John Charles Olmsted, brought here in 1903 by the citizen, not by the city, by the Citizen Park Board, wrote a master plan for Portland parks in which he called for a comprehensive interconnected park system which included natural areas, including the little areas you're talking about trying to protect here. Power of the Outside expert. I met David Good at a conference on the East Coast, brought him to Portland, spoke to the City Club. He didn't say a damn thing differently than I'd been saying and other folks like you had been saying for years and years, but he said it with a British accent. And people came up to me after he finished and said, we have to do in Portland what they're doing in London. I just smiled, bit my tongue, and said, we'll get right on it.
If you need a British accent, my husband's English.
Okay. Finding good models. We took a group like, thank you, Gladys McCoy, Chair of Multnomah County Commission, Mike Lindbergh, Chair of Portland Parks, City Commissioner, down to East Bay Regional Park District in the Bay Area and showed them on the ground what we're talking about, because they have 90,000 acres of natural areas in Contra Costa and Alameda counties. It doesn't get more urban than that. Maps are powerful. Joe Porosky, Portland State University. We flew the entire region with color infrared photography. Very poorly paid graduate student, Paul Newman, digitized that, and here is all the remaining natural areas in the Portland and Vancouver metropolitan region. And the important thing is, folks working on Fano Creek looked at that map and they could see how the work they were doing tied into the Tualatin River Basin, and furthermore, the rest of the region. It was the first time we had something visual that people could look at and say, oh, that would be the kind of system we could put together, the natural system. Using the media, I brought this guy out. He wrote an article in the New Yorker magazine. A good friend of mine said, Houck, don't be afraid to ask anybody to help you, no matter whether they're famous or not. I called the New Yorker magazine. I asked for Tony Hiss. He answered the phone. Tony here. I said, oh, I expected an assistant or something. I said, we're doing great work out here in Portland. You should come and write about us. Sure enough, House and Garden magazine paid him to come to Portland to do a story about us. Here he is in the Oregonian, okay? New Yorker visits Portland. That may sound insignificant, except that civic leaders, elected officials are impressed if you have somebody coming from the New Yorker magazine to write about what you're doing. And sure enough, here's his article, The Wild Side of Portland. There is our map. The first time it shows in a national publication. Jonathan Nicholas, who many of you probably remember from the Oregonian, now at Moda Health, wrote many columns about the importance of the work we're doing. Icons. I got Bud Clark to adopt the great blue heron as their city bird in 1986. That may sound trivial. However, every year since 1986, we get together with the mayor's office and write a proclamation about what city council is going to do to protect herons in the city of Portland. So every year it's an opportunity to get them to re-up their commitment to nature in the city. I'm very proud of this project. It's the largest hand-painted mural in North America on a building. Cost me $70,000, $75,000. So the idea is to try to integrate art. This is overlooking Oaks Bottom Wildlife Refuge. It's the Portland Memorial Mausoleum. Have fun. Gotta stop. Gotta have fun. The day that we got the heron adopted as a city bird, I'm at Bridgeport Brew Pub. The brewmaster walks by. How are things going at Audubon? I said, great. We just got the heron adopted as a city bird. He said, oh, well, I just brewed an ale. I haven't named yet. We'll call it Blue Heron Ale. So what? Well, here's the mayor of Oregon City, former, EPA wetland ecologist, Jim Desmond, now director of the Oregon Office of Nature Conservancy. That's where we all got together over pitchers of beer and talked about how strategize, what are we going to do next to move the agenda on protecting nature in the city. That created an environment where people got to know one another and trust one another, and I think that's why we got an awful lot done in this region. How am I doing on time?
You're fine.
You're fine.
Well, I need to look at my, oh, I've got 12 minutes and 28 seconds. It's all about relationships is my point. So all these people who've worked on these issues got to know one another. If somebody called me from the city or elsewhere and said, Houck, we have to do this, I would do it. And vice versa. I didn't have to talk to them for 3 weeks to try to figure out what their agenda was, whether I could trust them. I knew them, Tom. I knew if Tom called me, boom, I was there the next day, and vice versa. One of the things I love doing is taking people out and that's what I'm going to do more of. I just stepped down as director of the Institute and reassume my title, the urban naturalist, because I want to get back into taking people out like this on tours to get them turned on to these areas. Coalitions are incredibly important, so that one of the first people I got together with was Barbara Walker, who passed away several years ago. She was one of the founders of the 40-mile loop. And we realized that trail advocates and natural resource advocates had common agenda. You look at the 40-mile loop, and it connects all those parks and natural areas. Sharing the information, we've done a couple books, Wild in the City, and every year, and I really recommend this to you, at PSU, we have the Urban Ecology and Conservation Symposium where we get 500 people together who share information about the ecological research. It's in February. It's a fabulous meeting. Lessons learned, human health scale, connecting MODA, Health, Kaiser Permanente have all joined in with us now because they see the connection between human, physical, and psychological health. Speaking of which, a good friend of mine wrote Biophilic Cities, and in it he posited the question, what is the minimum daily requirement of nature? And what he did was take the analogy of the food pyramid, and he said, look, you're not going to go to the Arctic or the Amazon every year. You may go there once in a lifetime. But we should, the moment you walk outside your house, there should be access to nature. So that's the minimum daily requirement of nature. And this is getting to what Tom's going to talk about. The system we're talking about is an essential part of the region's green infrastructure at every scale, from 2,000 acre Smith and Bybee Lakes to little bump outs, bioswales. I showed you that map, right, of the state of Oregon and commented on how important scale is. If you have to map at the appropriate scale. Sure enough, Joe Porosky, once again, you know, this is the map that his grad student he created in 1989. See, it looks like there's nothing there. If you map at a finer scale, there's the urban forest canopy. You can start talking about the little sites that you guys are talking about with the site that Andrea is interested in. And of course, the city of Portland did some really interesting work in Johnson Creek watershed where they actually got FEMA money to buy out these homes that flooded year after year after year, moved them out and reconnected Johnson Creek floodplain. And in fact, part of the work they did on the Willamette River in the Tabor to the River program was look at if all they did was went in and replaced the pipes, it would cost $144 million. And we have 100-year-old aging pipes. What if we selectively did the pipes and included green infrastructure, trees, bioswales, and so on and so forth? Saves $63 million. Endless pressure, endlessly applied. That's on my signature. I got it from a friend, Brock Evans. When I first started in '82, he had helped create the North Cascades Wilderness there. I said, how do you do that? He didn't hesitate for a second. He said, endless pressure, endlessly applied. Andrea,
Okay.
that's your tagline. Sure. That's me and an Oregonian writer applying endless pressure. Results. We started in '88. We adopted this as our mission. Create a cooperative regional system of natural areas, open space, trails, and areas for wildlife, and very importantly for people. Now this is amazing. So I went to Metro in '89, having realized the land use planning program was not protecting nature in the city. Went to some Metro councilors with Barbara Walker and a few others, convinced them that Metro should take on natural resources at the regional level. 3 councilors said yes. They passed a resolution, and in 1992, a master plan for the Portland-Vancouver region. Not just Metro's jurisdiction, but also Southwest Washington. It's pretty amazing. This is what we're talking about doing. This is inside the UGB. This is outside, connecting nature inside with nature outside the UGB. And to this point, we've collected $363 million. Metro, through 2 bond measures, Metro owned nothing in 1989. They have 17,000 acres of natural areas inside and outside the urban growth boundary. And just as importantly, those bond measures, 25% of it went to the City of Portland Parks, to Walton Hills Park and Recreation District. So it's, again, local and regional. That's pretty damn amazing. And in fact, if you look at this addition of land to the public land base, it's no accident that '92 is when we started adding all that acreage, because we had a plan. We had the regional master plan. I'll finish. This guy was president of the Metro Council, David Bragdon, before he went to work in New York City for Michael Bloomberg as a sustainability manager. Okay, remember, I go to Gary Cook, Clackamas County, 1982. Go away. There's no place for nature in the city. David Bragdon, in his last 2 years in office, says we're going to create the best park system in the world. That's a huge shift over not too many years. And in fact, out of that, he brought Richard Daley, mayor of Chicago. Whoop.
No, it's.
Is that me?
No.
Oh. Richard Daley from Chicago and somebody from St. Louis, and basically challenge one another who's going to be the greenest city in the region. We created the Intertwine Alliance. One of the first things we did was create a regional conservation strategy, getting back to scale, and this is important for you guys. The Intertwine we defined as 3,000 square miles. So it's inside the UGP and outside. The question is, if you get money to go out and buy land or to restore it, what are your priorities? You cannot know your priorities without having done the mapping. And in fact, what we've done is it used to be they'd map at 30-meter scale. What is that, 90 feet? Anything less than 90 feet wouldn't show up on the map. Now we're at the 5-meter scale. So this is what we're looking at now, which actually allows you to start talking at the neighborhood scale and the scale you're talking about in your watershed. And I'll end by saying we've created the Intertwine Alliance. That's the website. Go to it. You can get lots of information there. And I'll mention I'm very proud of co-founding another organization, the Nature of Cities, about 7 years ago. We just had our first summit in Paris. It is bringing together people from around the world to share information and essays, photo essays, and so on and so forth. thenatureofcities.com. And my final point is going to be the third bond measures coming up in November. And with that money, Metro will continue acquiring land and have a grant program that locals can apply to for capital grants, new trail system, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm hopeful you will vote yes in November on this measure. And with that, and I think I finished under time, Mr. Lipton will regale you with the work he did very nearby in the headwaters to Tryon, the village at headwaters to Tryon Creek.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
We can
Thank you
vote
very
now.
This is forward.
Yeah, we can vote now. We got our ballots.
Okay,
So,
I just got mine today too.
yeah,
Yep.
And I do have information about that ballot. I hand out and there isn't enough for everybody, Dennis.
God, I have 3 more minutes. Tom,
Yeah.
you got 3 more minutes. How about 2 minutes of
Questions?
questions, if you have any?
Anybody got questions?
Or rebuttals, I take rebuttals too, it's fine.
Well, the only thing that I would like to say is that even though Andrea's project has been very successful and there's more work to be done, there's another point that we would like to take that I think that the watershed committee wants to support is, I don't have a big stretch of land the way Andrea's got. I've got a front yard, and I'm working on my front yard, and I'm getting my neighbor to work on their front yard,
Yep.
and my other neighbor too, and then that adds up. Every little
Absolutely.
bit adds up.
Mr. Lipton helped us produce a rain garden. I live in northwest Portland. Calculated how much of the water off the roof could go into that rain garden. And we have a huge number of birds coming in that we didn't have before. So yes, that's why I mentioned scale. It's important from your home site to Smith and Bybee Lakes.
Mhm.
So every scale is important.
Absolutely, absolutely. I know a lot of people who have said to me, well, I can't do it by myself, and nobody's asking you to do it by yourself. I'm asking you to do your piece, and you do your chunk, and
Yep.
you do your little bit.
And I will say, the reason we're here tonight is Andrea is tenacious as hell.
Yep, she is. I stay
That's
out of the
why,
way and
no,
I give her
I'm
plans.
dead serious. That's why I decided, in fact, I was telling Tom a little earlier, I've spent so much time in the last 10 years at the regional scale. I used to, back in the 80s, work neighborhood by neighborhood by neighborhood. I finally had decided I had to move to the metro scale to get something done. Metro is the only directly elected regional government in the country.
Mhm.
And by law, every city and county has to amend their plan to Metro's plan. And I'll tell you, as an advocate, it's pretty stupid, I realized eventually. I can go beat my head out in Washington County. I can go beat my head jurisdiction by jurisdiction. Rather than doing that, let's work at the regional scale. That's the choice I made. So.
Yeah, no, it's great. You gotta have guys at the top and guys at the bottom.
Okay, guys at the bottom. So just this little conversation has already triggered that. I wish I had put some more slides in here. I just have 4, but I hope this will be able to give you some ideas. And I think, looking at the group, I think you probably already have some of these ideas, but maybe I can help give you a little more information about how to go about some of these things. So I don't know if you're familiar with what we call the Headwaters Project, but over at Southwest 30th, just off of Barber, there's this apartment complex here, and then there are some row houses here, and then there's a senior living apartment here. And actually, let me show you the.
Pointer. There's a pointer on that, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Right here.
Right. Oops, wait a minute. Oh, Mike, you're missing a slide. The before shot of this.
Oh, well. It was
That's
the
right.
old Eagles site.
Yeah. Well, anyway,
Big
so let
parking
me
lot
show you.
and Small building.
So some of the things that I wanted to point out. So there used to be a road that went right through here. Anyway, so this project came up, and it's a long story about all the little details, but somebody mentioned about doing, about daylighting a creek that used to be in a pipe that went right through this site right here, which was the old Elks something or other club. And so it was a big parking lot. It did have a few trees here, nice little clump of trees that they used for picnicking and things like that. But it was a club, and then it had a big parking lot. And then the pipe went through here, and there's a natural area over here off the picture. But anyway, so the developer was looking at doing this, and these apartments, by the way, are owned by the city of Portland. It was one of Mayor Katz's ideas about trying to make money owning market rate apartments, take the profits, and then use those profits to put into the affordable housing budgets that they had. You'd have to call Portland Prosper to find out if they're the managers. I don't know if there is any profit that comes from these. I hope there is, and it goes into that account. That was the idea. But anyway, so we got involved, and part of the idea was that the city would help, the different departments would help, and I worked for the Bureau of Environmental Services. And so I got assigned to this project, and so when I did, and we started looking at things, it soon came about that, somebody mentioned, well, instead of putting a new pipe in, because the engineer said it and the city said it had to have a new pipe, and there was a pipe running through here too. They said, well, what if you daylighted that creek? Because it's a pipe for a creek, and then also stormwater goes into it. So that was discussed, and then I picked up on that, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna carry that. And I think, that's like, this has gotta happen. And so I put that into my way of thinking and everything. Anyway, we started looking at the site, and the developer, and then Mike got involved. We asked people like Mike and others, well, what would the value be of daylighting this creek? What kind of ecological, and they wouldn't necessarily know the economic value, but what are the economics, and then what are the ecological values? And of course, people that knew about wildlife and things like that said, well, yes, of course, this will give you about 400 feet of creek that will be daylighted, which is better than concrete pipe that's under the ground. And then somebody said, well, we could just landscape this area and leave the pipe underground. And then that was kind of like, well, landscaping with grass and a few trees, kind of the decorative look, is still not anywhere near what you get from wildlife in a more natural design, or trying to mimic nature as much as possible. Anyway, then the developer was starting to come along. His name is Jim Winkler Development, and in some kind of contract with the city. And then he was starting to say, well, this sounds kind of good to me. But he was also clicking, he's a business person, he's a developer. So click, click, click in his mind is kind of going, and he didn't say those words, that's fine. He started looking at the business side of this. And the business side from his standpoint was, well, I would have a really unique development if I had a creek running through it. If we could pull all the architecture together and make it all fit and look really good, and then have a very attractive, potentially higher marketable development than if he had gone with the standard kind of landscape approach. So that was one of the things that was intriguing him. And then he posed the question, well, if we daylight this here, what are you guys going to do, City of Portland, Bureau of Environmental Services, people that are trying to work on improving the conditions of the watersheds? what are you gonna do? Well, we looked at our maps, and it's kind of like those maps that Mike talked about. So the Bureau is required every 10 or 20 years that they have to do a inventory or an infrastructure assessment of what's out there. So and they looked at different pipes and different creeks and things like that. Well, this was not even on the map. This pipe was too small, so there was no recognition that this existed, no recognition that there was any need to do anything in this little 6 or 7 acre area. So that led everybody to say, well, it's not on our list, so we're not going to do anything. And then, anyway, through a lot of discussion and persuasion and endless pressure. Well, yeah, and I didn't call it pressure. I was sort of endless persuasion. It was sort of my way of trying to do things. And anyway,
He's a nice guy, not.
it's a good team, Laurel and Hardy. anyway, so then, so I went out, I was looking at it, we were talking about the issue, and we said, well, the creek runs in this pipe over to some other pipe, and the old creek is right up here off the picture. And the old creek is dry, because they had piped everything, so it's just left there. So we looked at it, and as I said, there used to be a road that ran through here, and I thought, this is a weird road. Do you ever get that feeling like, why does this street exist? You know? Because when you look here now, it's just a regular intersection, 4 corners. But it used to have this kind of freeway on-ramp sort of feel to it. And there are a number of these in the Southwest associated with, I suspect, with the construction of I-5 and what was happening to some of the transportation designers. I don't know for sure. But anyway, so I looked at this, I said, I don't, just me personally, landscape architect, not a street designer, but it was enough for me to say, I think it would be better if this road wasn't even here. And then that led, so I proposed that, and that led to a lot of discussions, and of course everybody said, no, you can't do that. And that was sort of the story of my career, is having an idea, and then having, getting the gumption to be able to say something to people, and then following up on that and trying to say, well, why not? Or I think it could, just things like that. Not this pressure, but rather questions, sort of pointed, purposeful questions about how do you, if you're saying no, then how do you get to that no, other than just your automatic, we don't do it that way type thing. So that's, if you're inclined to want to do that kind of thing, that was helpful for me. Anyway, so then others in BES agreed with me, but maybe not coincidentally, but strangely, the people in transportation, they weren't opposed to it, but they said, we don't just go around taking out roads because we don't have money to take out roads. We don't even have money to figure out whether this road should be taken out or not. So if you guys in BES want us to do that, you have to pay for a study. So it wasn't very expensive as things go, and so BES paid for a transportation study to determine whether it was a good idea to take this road out. Transportation consultant said, absolutely, this road should be taken out if you can do it, money, etc., and make this a traditional 4-way intersection, and because this is more dangerous. And then they said, you're not going to lose that much parking because you're going to get, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So, you get about the same amount of frontage for people to park on as they used to have here, and things like that. Anyway, what's not shown in this is that this property was, and I don't know, it may still be owned by a woman, her first name is Beverly, and then this property is owned, or was owned by may still be owned by a man named Mike. I forgot their last names, which has been 10 years. So at any rate, so then everything went into design, and so this is something that's really key as you might run into if you see something as a potential project or something like that, is that in the design, the engineers at this location right here, you can see there's parking right there. Well, that used to be a driveway that went into Mike's apartment complex. And then right over here, Beverly's driveway actually went this way, and it was right about by this white car. So when the plans came in and I reviewed them, I thought, man, we're losing all this space for the creek because we've got these driveways. And so in talking to the engineers, I asked, why don't we take these driveways out? And they go, oh, you can't do that, Tom. And I said, well, why not? And they said, well, because this is the way we do it. If they have a driveway, they get a driveway. You don't just take somebody's driveway away. And I said, I didn't really want to just take it away. I just thought we might be able to work something out. So we went back. I had a colleague that was very good with graphics, much better than I was. I said, Kevin, why don't we redesign this without permission, which of course we can't do anything even if we redesign it, because it's just paper, it's just pictures on paper, which actually turns out to be very helpful if you have anybody in your group or potentially in your group, landscape architect or an architect. Usually those are the two best because they're usually very good at graphics and being able to show something that's a little bit easier to understand than a typical engineering drawing. So at any rate, so we redrew this on this property. We redid this as they are shown here. This is ultimately what we did. So we went through a process. My main point of this, without telling you the whole story, is that if you have an idea and then you think it could be better, then if you can kind of get some way to visualize that in a physical form, then others can look at it. Because usually, especially with transportation, if you don't show them something, then they will always say no.
Yeah.
Because they can't see what you're talking about, and if you're not an expert at graphics and things like that, you may not be able to describe it very well. So it helps to have that kind of input. Anyway, so we did all that, and then they said, well, now what about Mike and Beverly? Maybe Mike and Beverly don't want their driveways like this. So I personally took the plans, met with Mike, met with Beverly, and they both said, yeah, I like it, makes my property better, you know. And actually, Mike, after this development was done, not because of his driveway necessarily, but when this was done, a number of companies came to Mike and wanted to buy his apartment complex, and maybe Beverly too, I didn't talk to her. But anyway, so that's how we ultimately got the design that you see today. And we made the creek longer, and then we put a culvert that goes across over here. It takes it to the restored creek here. Now, there's a little secret about this as well, and that is that in doing this, BES, which did not even have this on its radar, when this all came up and then the developer wanted to do it, and then that got to the director's office, the director was, you know, in favor of the project, things like that, but there was no money allocated. And so what BES did was said, okay, this is an important project, let's shift some of the budgets. And so they came up with the money. And so that can happen too, if you have a project. So I'm giving you these little, I hope helpful pieces of information. Anyway, and then, so it was all done, and then if you go out there now, there are some challenges, not everything's perfect, but overall, it's a really good project. And I think a few years ago, somebody at Audubon had said that a group of them went to the site, to this site, and that they were there for 2 hours, and they counted 28 different species of birds. And that sounded pretty good for that. And then there's all of this. The other thing that happened here, this was a traffic island, and so it was like just a grass traffic island, right? That there's a lot of them out there. And so I suggested, well, why don't we make a rain garden in here?
Mm-hmm.
And then they said, well, a rain garden for what? I said, well, why don't we get the drainage off the street and off this commercial area over here, and we'll pipe it, and the pipe already goes down the center of the street, and we'll daylight the pipe. So if you ever go by this site, there's a concrete, I call it an aqueduct, that goes right along here, because we had to get above the culvert that takes the creek into this side.
Should do a field trip for the group.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure,
because-
yeah, no, I just thought the same thing.
If you ever want to do that, let me know. I'd be glad to go over there. And anyway, so there's some details like that. Anyway, so this rain garden picks up drainage from this existing developed area. So not only did the Bureau help extend the creek here, it paid some money to restore the creek down here, and then the developer paid for this part, but then we got a retrofit of existing impervious area that had 0 stormwater management, and now it's managed in this.
Excellent.
So now the next slide I want to show you this. So this is several years ago. This is Barber, this is I-5. This is where the new marijuana shop is, and whatever this other stuff.
It's a spring garden thing,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's 26th
That's
Avenue.
26.
26.
Yes, this is 26,
Yeah.
right. And so this is what it used to look like. So it was, and I think a lot of this is owned by ODOT and or PDOT, but probably ODOT. So it was just a grassy area, right? And this is what they created when, I think when they did the freeway. At any rate, one thing about it is you can see, so this road right here is only to take traffic that is heading, what is that?
Northbound on Barber.
Northbound on Barber, you take this, then you can go left or right over here. And then this is only to take traffic from this down here up. So they're both one-way streets,
Yeah.
and they're both going north. Now, it's not exactly the best design in the world. There's a lot of wasted space. But who knows that, other than, I mean, I look for this kind of stuff. So to me, it's like, that's a lot of wasted space. Anyway, so, and I was not involved in the project that took place because I already left the Bureau. But, so for the most part, ODOT owns this land and they mow it every so often. And that's all they want to do. Matter of fact, if they could do something else like pave the whole thing, they would just as soon do that so that they don't have to maintain it. Because matter of fact, almost all transportation agencies hate trying to find money to take care of anything green. If it's concrete or asphalt, they don't have to do much to it, and they don't have to do it very often. But if it's green, they have to worry about grass growing. They have to worry about fire, and that is well founded in in the West, and things like that. But it also means that the rest of us, if we don't like gray, concrete, and asphalt, then we end up with that. We end up with less of this. But at least this is green. So then the next thing, oops. Oh, I went past it. Okay, so then somehow, because the Oregon Department of Transportation and the Bureau of Environmental Services, the City of Portland, is under what's called an NPDES MS4 stormwater permit with the state and the federal government, which means that the two entities have to do something about stormwater in a incremental way. There's no set amount that they have to do, but they have to make progress toward reducing pollutants that are discharging into the creeks and streams and lakes and rivers and everything else, and the ocean, if you're on the ocean. So anyway, so somehow this project came up, and this is, again, like I said, I think Barber is a state highway. So this is all.
It was ODOT, and because they were redoing storm drainage on the freeway.
Right,
That's
so
part of
they,
it.
so something happened, that triggered one thing or another, which turned out really neat. I mean, they said, okay, we're gonna take this land, and this part here, they'll take some drainage from Barber, they'll take some drainage from the freeway and put it over here. This, I think, gets drainage, I'm sure, from the freeway, and then it ultimately goes back into the pipe that runs down to Tryon Creek somewhere down here. So this was really good. They did that, they spent a lot of money, and it's going to do a lot of good work to reduce pollution that's going into the stream, reduce the energy that goes into the stream. But they still have this left over, which means, hey, what about that space? So I just let myself kind of go after I did this, and I thought, well, what if this was not made to be for stormwater directly, but indirectly? What if it was made for habitat? And you go, well, wait a minute, how can you make something for habitat there? Well, that's where you get people like Mike and others and start talking about, what kind of habitat could this be? And then how do you protect it?
Right.
And is it protected? And maybe it even has a fence around it. Wouldn't it? It just struck me, I thought, wouldn't it be neat to have a place where human beings were fenced out? And it was just nature that got to be there. And we don't get to go in, we can look at it, but we don't get to go in. Anyway, that was just, so I can have all kinds of ideas. But the other thing that struck me is these roads. So when they did this project, if I had been around and been able to suggest things, I would have said, take this road out. And you say, well, how do you get from here down to here, right? Well, that's why you have traffic engineers or designers who figure things out. You got a problem, design it, figure it out. So I believe that you could get down there, you could block this off, you could go over here, redesign this right here, and make a bigger radius here, and make it so that you turn right here, make this a little bit wider, so that you have two-way traffic. So you turn right to come down here, and then go left or right, and you still come this way, or come this way, and go left up to go out that way. I think there's enough room that it would work. But they didn't do that, they didn't think of that. Anyway, and then they put in some new stormwater planters right here, and that's good, except they only get drainage from this side, they don't get drainage from this side. And it's kind of like, why didn't they put the planters under the road? Well, you might think, well, it doesn't rain under the road, because the freeway's in the way. But if you have a stormwater planter that's getting drainage from the street, it's gonna get water without needing rain, because it'll get that rain. Anyway, the idea of doing that would be so it gets drainage from this side and this side, because right now it only gets it from this side. But anyway, little details like that. But the main point is that there are so many places, maybe not so many, but there are places out there like this. They're owned by ODOT, they're owned by PDOT, and there are opportunities. They're on the east side of town where I live. There's lots of places that have been transformed into rain gardens that were previously paved, and they weren't even green like this was. So, and then, yeah, so that's it. That's all I wanted to share with you. But now, actually, I can think of a lot of stuff I'd like to share with you, but I probably don't have time. So, I'll stop.